Users of Reddit who had intimate favors offered as payment for your work. What happened? Story 1. This happened about 6 years ago when I was working as a freelance mechanic in the outskirts of Denver. I was in my mid-20s, still building a reputation, mostly relying on referrals and doing drive-out jobs. One day, a woman I'd never met texted me, saying she got my number from a mutual friend. Her car wouldn't start, and she couldn't afford a tow or shop visit. I agreed to drive out to her place, about 30 minutes into a semi-rural area. I ran diagnostics and found her starter motor was completely done. Coincidentally, I had a spare in my kit. I told her I could replace it on the spot and that I'd only charge for the part since we had a mutual connection. She paused and asked, "What if I paid in a different way?" I didn't want to assume anything, so I asked what she meant. She stepped closer and said, "You're cute. I'm single. You're helping me out. Maybe we could help each other." Let's just say things escalated. It was all consensual and oddly sweet. We stayed in touch for a little while, but nothing serious came from it. Looking back, I wouldn't say it was a transaction. More like an unexpected connection. Still, the most unforgettable repair job I've ever done. Story 2. Just last week, after a draining day, I decided to unwind with a drink at a bar in downtown Atlanta. I was alone, enjoying the music and sipping a cocktail, when I struck up a conversation with a guy who clearly had money. He had a set of Lamborghini keys casually sitting on the bar. After a few drinks, I joked about taking his car for a spin. To my surprise, he said yes. Bad decision. I was a couple of drinks in, overestimated my ability to drive a supercar, and ended up jumping the curb. Not my proudest moment. The aftermath was as chaotic as you'd imagine. Story 3. I'm a 29-year-old woman who works online, and my boyfriend, 28, is in industrial rope access, high risk, decent pay. I was doing okay until a cyclone hit the coastal areas where most of my clients are based. My income nosedived. My boyfriend stepped up and covered our rent for 2 months, no hesitation. He'd even clean up whenever he stayed over. But I hated relying on him that much. I borrowed a few thousand from a friend to revamp my online business. Better branding, premium content, new equipment. Then another storm hit, Cyclone Emery, and everything went to hell. Power outages, no internet, subscribers vanished. I was in debt and ashamed to ask my boyfriend for more help. Out of desperation, I offered my friend, yes, the one I owed, an alternative repayment. I told him he could have me physically instead of the money. He agreed. I've never told anyone. I hate that I did it. I don't know if I was being resourceful or just lost. Probably both. Story 4. Back when I lived in Bristol, England, I worked full service in the adult industry. Clients would text when outside. I never gave out the building code. One night, I saw a disoriented guy on the street, figured he was my client. We locked eyes, did the "is it you" wave, and went upstairs. He was oddly curious about the apartment, number of bedrooms, rent, etc. I assumed he was just nervous. When we got to my room, I turned on the charm and asked for payment before we did anything. That's when his face froze. Turns out, he wasn't my client. He thought I was the estate agent showing the unit for rent. We both laughed it off later, but at the time, I wanted to disappear. My roommate overheard the whole thing and couldn't stop laughing. Poor guy. I doubt he moved into the building. Story 5. A few years ago, I was 19 and stranded in Vegas. No hotel, no cash, just vibes. Then I met this 21-year-old girl who had a room. We clicked, and she offered me a drink at her place. One thing led to another, and we ended up hooking up all night. It was wild. Like, she had infinite stamina. I was out of energy by sunrise. Next morning, I woke up in a real bed, and she even ordered room service. No exchange of numbers, no promises, just a chaotic but memorable night. I guess you could say I paid for the room in kind. Story 6. When I started fixing electronics around rural Montana, one of my first clients was this older guy with a busted laptop. I quoted him $40 for a new power button. He smirked and said, "Too bad you're not into guys, I'd offer something else." I laughed and said I preferred cash. Later, I figured out a fix that didn't require a new part. I went back the next day, fixed it, and didn't charge him. He was impressed, handed me a beer, and asked if I'd be at the rodeo. I wasn't, but it's still one of the more bizarre but oddly flattering gigs I've done. Story 7. When I worked night shifts at a hotel in San Antonio, I got some strange requests. But one night, a very drunk guest came to the desk around 2 a.m., winked exaggeratedly, and asked if I could bring her room service. Definitely not food-related. She was out of her mind and not my type, even if I were into that. I politely declined and said I just handle check-ins, not extracurriculars. She laughed and stumbled back to her room. Night shift at hotels? Never dull. Story 8. As an apprentice electrician in New Zealand, I helped install air conditioning in government housing. Since tenants didn't pay us directly, any offers weren't about bills. One older woman flirted heavily, hinting I could stick around. I declined politely. Another time, 2 teenage girls, twins, followed me around, giggling and dropping hints. One gave me her number. I later found out they were 16. I was 20. Legally fine here, but ethically? Hard no. I had no game anyway, so nothing would have happened. Very movie-like, but without the soundtrack. Story 9. I delivered pizzas in rural Arkansas. One night, I rang the bell and was greeted by a woman clearly high, probably on meth. She kept repeating, "I like it hot," stretching the word like it had extra syllables. Instead of paying, she grabbed my arm and kept saying it. Thankfully, another woman appeared, apologized, paid, and took the pizza. I left fast. Not exactly a scene out of a romantic comedy. Story 10. Back in the 1980s, I was a cable installer in Florida. There was a legend about a woman in an apartment complex who supposedly hooked up with cable guys. One day, I got sent there and met her, attractive, wearing a see-through robe. I kept it professional. Weeks later, my coworker Dave called us to a park and claimed he'd been with her. Showed us evidence in his pants, gross but convincing. We weren't sure, but knowing Dave, it was likely true. The legend lives on. Story 11. I worked in specialty waste removal for about 5 years in Oregon. Not your curbside trash pickup, but the kind where we entered homes and offices to haul out bulk items. Nobody ever tried to pay in any unconventional way, but let's just say I saw more than I ever needed to. The most memorable? A woman who answered the door wearing practically nothing but a smile. Probably a model or someone with a very rich partner. She lingered the whole time we moved boxes, wearing a bikini that barely qualified as clothing. Nothing happened, but it's burned into my brain. Also, we once picked up a bag full of adult toys. One of them switched on in the truck bed and made the loudest buzzing noise against the metal. The embarrassment on her face? Priceless. Story 12. I'm a 23-year-old woman from Minneapolis. About a year ago, I got out of a long, emotionally intense relationship. He was the only guy I'd ever been with, and I thought we'd get married. After the breakup, I was devastated, but over time I started healing and exploring what I wanted. I've realized I enjoy being spoiled. That's new for me. I go on dates, set clear boundaries, no intimacy, not even kissing, and most guys are surprisingly respectful. Then I met a guy on a dating app who asked if I'd be his foot queen. I joked I'd only consider it if I got paid. Next thing I know, I'm in his apartment using just my feet for $250. He was polite, respectful, and even tipped me. I didn't enjoy it, but I was broke. Honestly, I'd do it again. It was weirdly empowering. Story 13. Back in college, I helped organize events at a university in North Carolina. One weekend, we hosted a big student convention at a hotel. After dark, it turned into a full-on party fest. Late one night, 2 girls from another school knocked on our room door. "We heard you guys know how to party," one said, biting her lip like she was auditioning for a teen movie. The other one pretended to accidentally unbutton her shirt. It was like they were acting out a bad rom-com. They were clearly younger, maybe freshmen, and I felt more like their RA than anything else. I politely shut them down. Fun fact, I didn't even have booze, just half a pizza and a folder full of workshop schedules. Story 14. This was a few years ago during my stint delivering food in a tough part of Chicago. I'm not exactly a heartthrob, just a guy who shows up, does his job. One night, I pull up to a sketchy apartment and this stunning woman answers the door. Total 10/10. She smiled, leaned in, and said, "Want to come inside?" Every instinct in my body screamed, nope. Either I was about to disappoint her or get robbed. I smiled, handed her the food, and executed the smoothest exit of my life. Not today, danger. Not today. Story 15. I used to play guitar in a small indie band around Austin. We were good, but not getting any traction. Then we played a showcase gig and caught the attention of a woman with ties to a local radio station. She talked to me after our set, flirty, confident, clearly hinting that if we got to know each other better, she might be able to help us out. I was into her already, so it didn't feel forced. We ended up spending time together, and sure enough, our single got added to the station's indie spotlight. That exposure led to more gigs and real money. I liked her genuinely, but I'd be lying if I said the career boost wasn't a bonus. Story 16. A few years ago, I was broke and living above a laundromat in Cleveland. I matched with a woman on a dating app who looked way out of my league. We started chatting, and she invited me over that night. She answered the door in pajamas with a pizza in hand. We ate, talked, and ended up in bed. I thought I'd hit the jackpot. Then she said, "Thanks for coming." I didn't want to share my pizza with my ex again. Turns out, I was part of a plan to make her ex jealous. She posted a picture of us online. 2 weeks later, she texted, "My ex is pissed. Want to come over again?" I couldn't even be mad. Story 17. Back when I lived in a complex in Salt Lake City, I did side gigs fixing Wi-Fi and home networks. One day, a neighbor calls in a panic. Her streaming wasn't working. I went over, found her router buried in a closet under a pile of coats. As I fixed it, she stood nearby in a robe, giving me serious flirt vibes. Once I got everything back online, she said, "I don't have cash, but maybe I can offer something else." I had a girlfriend and a strong sense of self-preservation, so I smiled and said, "Just tell your friends I'm good with routers." She laughed, then asked for my Venmo. Later, she sent me $5 and a pizza emoji. Best case scenario, honestly. Story 18. I used to do handyman work around Phoenix, fixing sinks, assembling furniture, whatever paid. One day, I got a referral to fix a garbage disposal for a woman living in a high-end condo. She was glamorous, like reality TV level glam. While I was elbow deep in the sink, she leaned over and asked, "Do you take alternative payments?" I panicked. I asked, like Venmo? She smirked, "No, something more fun." I politely declined, joking that my landlord doesn't accept innuendo. She laughed and said, "You passed. I do that to all the guys. I'm writing a book about how men react to flirting during manual labor." She paid me cash and gave me a Gatorade. I left feeling both relieved and weirdly validated. Story 19. When I did tech support for a cable company in Pittsburgh, I got called to a woman's place who was having Wi-Fi issues. She answered the door in a robe and offered me lemonade. Already suspicious. As I fixed the router, she kept winking and said, "Now, what do I owe you?" I nervously said, "Unless you mean other forms of payment," and tried to wink. She looked confused. I meant like, "Should I tip you?" Turns out, I accidentally propositioned her. I turned red, mumbled something about company policy, and left so fast I almost forgot my toolkit. Story 20. I worked at an indie coffee shop in a college town in Vermont. One customer, let's call her Lena, was intense. She tipped in change, flirted constantly, and once gave me a drawing of myself that looked more like a cartoon ogre. One day, she leaned over the counter and whispered, "What would it take to get this espresso for free?" I joked, "A coupon?" She replied, "No coupon, just me," and bit her straw. It was more awkward than enticing. I panicked and said, "Espresso yourself somewhere else." She blinked. I blinked. Then she laughed, paid in coins, and left. A few weeks later, she came in with her new boyfriend and said, "That's the guy who turned me down over $2.50. Story 21. I've been a plumber in the Kansas City area for over a decade. Most days it's standard stuff, leaky faucets, clogged drains, and occasionally rescuing a toothbrush from a U-bend like it's a Pixar short. One day, I got called to a fancy home in a quiet suburb. The woman who answered was dressed like she was headed to a spa, cucumber water in hand, candles burning, soft music playing. She led me to the kitchen and said she liked to learn by watching. I got to work. She hovered nearby, asking strange questions. "What's the most difficult job you've ever done?" she asked in a voice that belonged in a soap opera. When I tightened a pipe, she said, "Strong hands." Then came the kicker. As I handed her the invoice, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "What if I offered a different form of payment?" I'm married, so I gave her a chuckle and said, "Unless it's a Home Depot gift card, I'll still need a check." She laughed. It might have been a joke, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't. Just as I was packing up, her husband walked in with smoothies and said, "Hey babe, post-yoga smoothies." Then he winked at me. No clue what that wink meant, but I got out of there fast. Story 22. Back in my days working as a neighborhood photographer in Milwaukee, I got hired to do a private shoot for a local artist who wanted intimate, earthy vibes. When I showed up, she greeted me in a silk robe and said she wanted to feel free during the shoot. I didn't think too much of it until we got to the third outfit change, which was no outfit at all. She asked if I'd accept a different kind of payment for the shoot. I was stunned. I mean, she was attractive, but I was there to do a job. I politely declined and said I'd stick to the agreed rate. She paid up, but I left feeling like I'd just dodged a very confusing bullet. Story 23. I used to be a mobile dog groomer in rural Colorado. One summer afternoon, I went to a client's house to groom her 2 spaniels. She answered the door wearing very little and said she'd just finished tanning. As I worked on the dogs, she kept lingering, asking if I was single, if I liked older women, if I'd be around next week. When it came time to settle the bill, she said, "Do you take creative payment options?" I laughed it off, said I preferred cash or card. She pouted and paid. I never went back. The dogs were sweet, but the vibes? Not so much. Story 24. Years ago, I worked as a freelance house painter in South Texas. I got a job painting a couple of rooms in a duplex owned by a woman in her 40s. She was friendly and chatty, always bringing me lemonade or snacks. On the final day, she walked in while I was cleaning up and said, "You know, I could think of a few ways to say thank you that don't involve money." She winked. I smiled, thanked her for the snacks, and said I'd stick to the invoice. She laughed and said I was old-fashioned. I'll take that over being caught in a messy situation any day. Story 25. In my early 20s, I worked for a moving company in Indiana. We'd get all sorts of clients, but one stood out, a divorcee who hired us to move her ex-husband's stuff out of the house. She flirted the entire time we were there, making comments like, "You boys are strong, and I bet you're great with your hands." When we finished, she pulled me aside and asked how I'd feel about a little bonus thank you. I declined politely. She tipped me extra anyway. I'm pretty sure she was just trying to get back at her ex, but I wasn't about to get caught in that crossfire. Story 26. I was working as a rideshare driver in Tampa when I picked up a woman from a bar around 1 a.m. She was clearly tipsy but coherent. On the ride, she started complimenting me, calling me cute and brave for driving at night. When we got to her place, she lingered in the car and said, "You want to come inside? I don't have cash, but I've got other ways to say thank you." I declined. She shrugged, laughed, and said, "Your loss." She gave me 5 stars, but I never picked her up again. Some rides are better left one way. Story 27. I used to do freelance landscaping in a small town in Oregon. One client, a widow in her 50s, hired me to clean up her overgrown backyard. She'd watch from the porch, bringing iced tea and asking about my personal life. On the last day of the job, she handed me the check, leaned in, and said, "If you ever want to earn a little extra, I've got plenty of bushes still in need of trimming." I nodded, said thank you, and nearly tripped over the hose trying to leave. The check cleared, but the memory still makes me chuckle. Story 28. A few years ago, I was doing furniture assembly gigs in Las Vegas. One client had just moved into a high-rise and needed help putting together her bedroom set. As I was fastening the last bolts, she came in with 2 glasses of wine and said, "Most guys would charge double for this kind of work. You, though, you deserve something special." I told her I didn't drink on the job and preferred to keep things professional. She sighed, handed me the cash, and said, "Your loss. But I respect it. Honestly, I was just glad to make it out without things getting awkward." Story 29. I worked as a substitute teacher in upstate New York. One day, I was covering a high school science class when a senior, 18, but still a student, made an extremely inappropriate comment during lab. She said, "If I get an A on this, will you let me take you out?" I was shocked. I shut it down immediately and reported it to the admin. Kids can be bold, but that was a line I wasn't willing to blur. They reassigned her to another class, and I kept my distance. That was the day I realized I preferred adult learning environments. Story 30. Back when I worked as a bouncer at a nightclub in Toronto, I had to deal with all sorts of people, drunk patrons, fake IDs, the works. But there was one regular who always tried to flirt her way past cover charges. One night, she leaned in and said, "How about I give you something better than cash?" I told her, "Unless it's a winning lottery ticket, it's going to be $20. She rolled her eyes, paid up, and walked in. I saw her again a few weeks later, this time with a new guy. No flirting, just a nod. Guess she realized I wasn't about to mix business with pleasure. Story 31. I used to do mobile phone repairs around Baltimore, mostly small gigs replacing screens and batteries. One day, I got a call from a woman who said her phone wouldn't charge. I dropped by, ran a quick diagnostic, and found it was just grime in the port, easy fix. As I handed it back, she leaned on the kitchen counter, gave me a slow smile, and said, "I don't have any cash right now, but maybe I could offer something else?" I froze. She was definitely flirting, and I'd be lying if I said she wasn't attractive. But I also saw a baby monitor blinking in the background, and suddenly remembered I had somewhere else to be. Told her the fix was free this time, and she could leave a review if she really wanted to thank me. 5 stars and a very handy comment later. I knew I made the right call. Story 32. While working as a freelance photographer in Portland, I got hired by a woman for a boudoir shoot. She wanted raw, real, sensual. Not unusual, I've done those before. The shoot went well, very professional. But afterward, when I asked about the invoice, she said, "Do you take body heat as currency?" I laughed, but she wasn't joking. She stepped closer, unzipped her dress, and said, "Seriously, I think we'd both enjoy this exchange." I was tempted, but I just started dating someone. I told her I'd accept Venmo, not vibes. She paid, but added, "Offer stands if you ever change your mind." Story 33. I was working in home appliance delivery in Tucson a few summers ago. It was over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and we had just hauled a washer and dryer up 3 flights of stairs. The woman who lived there was lounging in a bikini, sipping something out of a coconut-looking cup. When we finished the install, she looked me up and down and said, "Do I really have to pay if I invite you to stay?" I thought she was joking. She wasn't. She even added, "I tip well in private." I told her I was flattered, but had another delivery. She said, "Your loss," and handed me a 50. I left wondering if that kind of thing happened more often than I realized. Story 34. Back when I worked as a freelance tutor in Vancouver, I had a client, a woman in her 30s, who hired me to help her nephew with algebra. After a few sessions, she started requesting that I stay longer just to chat. Then one evening she said, "You've been so good to us, I'd like to repay you in a more personal way." I blinked. She wasn't subtle at all. I reminded her I was there for her nephew, not her, and finished the session like nothing had happened. She didn't book again. Probably for the best. Story 35. I was doing Uber Eats in Miami. Late one night, I delivered to a high-rise condo. When I knocked, the door opened and a woman in lingerie answered. She smiled and said, "You're cute. Want to come in and split it with me?" I was dumbfounded. She added, "I didn't order this for the food." I politely declined. She pouted, handed me a $10 tip, and said, "Well, if you change your mind, I'm apartment 17B. Doors always open." I never went back, but I did start carrying pepper spray, just in case the roles ever reversed. Story 36. I was doing a deep clean service in a loft apartment downtown Chicago. The client, a woman in her late 20s, was lounging around in a robe the whole time, watching Netflix and occasionally accidentally flashing a leg. When I finished, she walked up real close and said, "So how about instead of money, we call it even if you stay a while?" I was stunned. I was sweaty, covered in dust, and holding a mop. Hardly prime seduction material. I smiled and said, "Tempting, but I've got more dirt to fight across town." She laughed and tipped me in actual cash. Good tip, too. Story 37. Used to do freelance IT in San Diego. Got called out to fix a desktop that wouldn't boot. Woman in her mid-30s answered the door in a silk robe, already raising red flags. I got the PC up and running in under 20 minutes. She stood behind me the whole time, offering wine, asking if I had a girlfriend. Finally, she said, "You know, I could make this worth your while if you don't charge me." I told her I preferred payment in dollars, not drama. She paid, but not before saying, "Boring men never get the fun stories." Oh, I still got one. Story 38. I was a massage therapist in a small town in Wyoming. One client, a divorcee in her late 40s, was always a little too complimentary. Then one session she casually asked, "Do you do extras?" I paused. "Extras?" She gave me a look that said yes, those extras. I told her I was licensed and professional. She acted embarrassed, but I didn't get another booking from her. Word got around fast in that town. A few weeks later, I was asked the same question by someone else. I guess I'd unknowingly become part of the underground rumor circuit. Story 39. I used to do backyard landscaping up in Seattle. One summer, I got hired by a couple to redo their patio. The wife was very chatty. One day, the husband wasn't home, and she came outside in a swimsuit that left little to the imagination. She offered me lemonade, then asked if I wanted to cool off inside and discuss a discount. I politely declined and kept working. When the husband came home later, she acted like nothing had happened. I finished that job faster than any other that summer. Story 40. I was a DJ for hire in New Orleans. One night, I worked a bachelorette party in a rental house. After my set, the bride-to-be cornered me in the kitchen and said, "You were amazing. Want a private encore?" I laughed, thinking she was drunk joking. But then she said, "I'm getting married, not dead." I reminded her that I was paid to spin records, not lives. She pouted, promised not to tell, and walked away. I packed up and left. The maid of honor gave me a fat tip on the way out, said I passed the integrity test. Still not sure if she was serious.